history series that we call Between Cross and Crescent. Of course, this series was inspired by what's going on, of course, in Israel and in the Middle East. I mean, our relationship with the surrounding countries of what's going on over there. And I always thought it would be interesting to discuss our history of how Jews fared under the two other great Western religions that sprung from monotheism. And those are, of course, Christianity and Islam. Now, it's very difficult from studying this part of history that we're going to be talking about to make any really resolutions to what's going on today, because as you'll see, it's almost completely upside down of what it was in the years bygone. We will find, and it's no mystery, I hope it's no mystery to you, and it's no secret, that the Jews certainly fared much better under Muslims than they did under Christians, certainly starting from the Crusades onward. And there's probably a number of reasons I will discuss why this is true. So, I mean, if you look at it and you think about the world today, and you see our relationship with the Christians versus our relationship with the Muslim world, it seems it's a bit of a stretch, you know, when I say this. So, without trying to be smart or being someone that looks back at history and learns lessons today, it's going to be very difficult to find some analogies of what's going on in the world today. And that's not really what the course is all about. The course is basically to look back and to see how actually we fared under these two religions. We have to start, I think, off certainly at the beginning of Christianity as our jumping point. Starting probably from, you know, when Jesus came into the world, we all know basically that he surrounded himself with a number of followers. These followers believed him to be the Messiah. Jesus was eventually, went up to Jerusalem, went on trial. Pontius Pilate condemned him. He was crucified. Christianity believes he came back through a resurrection, spent a couple of days with his disciples, gave them the charge to spread this word out into the world, and left. Okay, so there was a church that sprung up in Jerusalem under the leadership of James, Jesus' brother, who basically were what were called Jewish Christians, you know, at the time, who believed that Jesus was the Messiah, which in general, I mean, if we think about it, messianic yearnings were very, very high at that time. I'm sure Jesus was not the only fellow to claim that he was the Messiah, or either those that claimed him to be the Messiah. There were a number of different people. Don't forget that we're talking about in the year 35 BC through 70, 80. I mean, this was a very, very tumultuous period within Jewish history. I mean, with the eventual breakdown of the temple and the expulsion of the Jews within Israel itself. So you can imagine that even Jews themselves, even non-Jewish Christians, had this tremendous messianic yearning, because Jews could not fathom any way that they could exist outside of a temple-centered religion. I mean, if you look in the Torah, the book of Leviticus that we're studying right now, or reading right now, most of it deals with the temple. Temple and sacrifices, purity and impurity, laws of the land. So Israel is directly bound and tied up with living in Israel. I mean, that was the purpose of giving the Torah. Not that it should be actually kept in the desert, but that the Torah, the book of Moses, is to be kept in the land of Israel. And so Jews couldn't fathom, I mean, what do you mean we're going to live in Persia or Babylon? We're going to live in Egypt and fulfill the Torah? Forget that. It doesn't make any sense. So there was a tremendous amount of messianic yearning among the Jewish people themselves. So Jesus did not come into a void where a startling new concept. I mean, great prophets talked about a coming of the Messiah. Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Amos and Hosea and Zechariah. A number of prophets, one day there will be. So these 12 or 15 or 20 or 100 or 500 people believe this man called Jesus of Nazareth to be the Messiah. Fine, all right, you know. And that's probably where the story would have ended. He would have died, and the church would have run its course and eventually collapsed under the weight of expulsion, you know, after the destruction of the temple, and it would have been a footnote, if even a footnote, They say around the time of the Second Temple, there was probably close to 100,000 prophets that were walking the land of Israel. We only have the books of a number of them, a small number of the prophets, but it was probably 100,000 people that had the gift of prophecy during the First Temple. So it would have been a footnote had it not been for one fellow, a Jewish guy, of course a good marketer, by the name of Saul of Tarsus. Today we know him as Paul, his Greek name, Paul of Tarsus. Paul himself never met Jesus. Paul came after Jesus' death, but through a vision on his way to Damascus, he became a Christian. And he decided, no, you know what? It's going to be very difficult to convert all these Jews. Jews are stubborn by nature. It's a slow go. The rules and regulations are very, very difficult to keep. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of work. So we're just going to go and we're going to switch the program 5 degrees. We're going to go out to the Gentiles and we're going to forget about the mitzvahs. We're still going to talk about Jesus because he believed that Jesus was the Messiah. And he went about and he started to proselytize to the Gentiles outside of the land of Israel. And he opened up churches all over around in Asia Minor and in Syria, etc., etc., etc. When he was confronted by the early Jewish Christians who said, who said, what is this? You know what? Jesus was a Jew. He might have even been an Orthodox Jew who kept the Torah. And what are you doing? You're abrogating all the rules of the Torah. So he said, no, this is what Jesus wanted. Jesus absolutely wanted it to go out to the world, not to be only limited to the Jewish people, but he came as the Savior to everybody. And that basically changed the face of Christianity. Because once Christianity went out now to the world, it stopped being more or less a Jewish religion. It had Jewish origins, but until now it was basically a Jewish sect. It was, okay, Jews who believed in Jesus as the Messiah. Okay, maybe that's a sin, maybe that's even a terrible sin, maybe it's a worst sin, but it wasn't a separate religion. It was Jews who believed in the Messiah. Now what happened is, it becomes now a religion outside of Judaism. It becomes now a Gentile religion with Jewish roots. And the further it got away from Judaism, the more the early church fathers tried to cut those roots to Judaism, tried to show that it has nothing to do with Judaism. Judaism is a religion of law. It's a religion of the book. Christianity is a religion of the word. It's a religion of spirit. It's a religion of salvation. We don't need the law anymore. We don't need circumcision. We don't need to keep kosher. We don't need all of these things because Jesus had already fulfilled all of this. For God had begotten his only one Son and he gave it to the world as a present to them. So now, all of a sudden, we find ourselves in a completely different situation. Now there's a competing religion in the Roman Empire. There's what we call Christianity. And it's not Judaism, even though that the early church fathers took upon the Old Testament as part of Christianity, but only as far to validate their beliefs. That's all they take the Old Testament. It's not rules and regulations that we need to follow. It's only there to validate the life and being of Jesus Christ. That's all. So if they quote you, if you know what Christians quote primarily the prophets. Very little do they quote from Leviticus, except the fact that, we brought blood and Jesus was blood. So if blood in the Old Testament can purify you and can absolve you of the sins, because what do you do if you did a sin in the Old Testament? You brought a ram, or you brought a lamb, or you brought a goat, and they slaughtered it, and they took the blood, and they sprinkled it against the altar. So if blood can do it there, this is the ultimate blood. This is the best blood that you can get. God's own blood. Okay, God's own blood. How can you get better? But that's as far as they accepted the Old Testament. It's God's word. It is real, but it only was there as a precursor until Jesus came along. Once Jesus came along, then all of the rules and regulations fall apart. We don't need this anymore. Okay. Christianity didn't get dogmatic until the 4th century. Until the 4th century, there was a number of different sects and beliefs within Christianity. And I just want to go over just a couple, just to show you, because we're just bringing this as an illustration of how this started and where this relationship with Jewish people got going. One group that called themselves the Ebionites were basically Jewish Christians. That's what they were. They were Jews who believed in Judaism, followed the Torah, kept the mitzvahs, but believed that Jesus was the Messiah, and believed that Jesus was human and not divine. He was the Messiah. He came to fulfill a mission. He did fulfill the mission, and eventually he'll come back to the end of days, and he'll fulfill all of the works of the Old Testament prophets. But he was Jewish, he was human, and not divine. That's what the Ebionites believed. And they were a sect that, where do you think they primarily lived? Within Israel, obviously. And they were Jews. There was a fellow by the name of Marcion, a philosopher, a Greek, that could not accept Jesus' humanity, and he argued exactly the opposite. He argued that Jesus was not human at all. He was purely spirit. But you saw someone on the cross. Wasn't there someone on the cross? Didn't someone die? That was only an illusion. That was not the real Jesus. The real Jesus was only a spirit, completely divine, and not human at all. And he goes into a whole philosophy about the world and how the world was created and how Jesus came along and purified the world, etc., etc., etc. But that he's completely divine and there's no human element to him. Okay, so we have two extremes. We have the Ebionites on one hand who believe in Jesus as the Messiah, completely human. We have Marcionites who believe Jesus completely divine and no part of him human. And who eventually wins this debate? There's a coalition. What happens is they bring both of it together. And somehow, somewhere, and don't ask me because this is not a class on Christian theology, they come up with the idea of the Trinity. That Jesus and God are of the same essence. The Holy Spirit makes up the third leg of the Trinity. But that Jesus himself is wholly human and wholly divine. That's what it is. Completely human and completely divine. So he did die on the cross. There was bloodshed on the cross. There was all of that stuff. He was human, but at the same time he was human, he was divine as well. He was God, and when God created the world, and he talks to people in Genesis, who's he talking to? He's talking to Jesus, because both of them together created the world. They're the same essence, the Father and the Son. And that became Christian dogma. That's it. That's what Christians believed. End of the story. How it could be, how it could happen, what does it mean, all of this theology doesn't make a difference. Maybe to us, as we look as Jews, we look at it and we say, hey, this seems far out to us. How could someone be human and be divine at the same time? But to them it did make a difference. This is what Jesus is. That's what it is. Now, if this is so, and Jesus was crucified on the cross, and he was human, meant that there was agony. I mean, you know, this was a horrible way to die, being crucified, because basically what happens, I mean, I'm no doctor, but basically you suffocate, basically, up there. I mean, you know, and this is a horrible, horrible kind of a death. So there was agony. So who's to blame for this? Who was the one that caused Jesus to die? So if we look in the Gospels, what? Who was it? Of course, if you look in the Gospels, and as the Gospels look in the chronological order, with Mark being the earliest of the Gospels that were written, and John being the last of the Gospels, the 4 Gospels that were written, you will find a trend that goes from benevolence, or not a benevolence, but benign relationship with the Jews, to an antagonistic relationship with the Jews. Until John, who was by far the most anti-Semitic of the 4 Gospels. I mean, you know, Jews are the children of the devil. We are a devil, we're a religion. We were the cause, etc., etc., etc. And Matthew, of course, you know, the sin be upon us and for our children for all time. So it was definitely the Jews that caused the death of Jesus. Now, if you're a believer in that Jesus came down to purify the world, and you hear that Jews killed Jesus, relationship don't start off that well. Doesn't start off that well, you know, with the Jewish people. I mean, and this is the kind of feeling that the early church fathers fostered among Christians. I mean, so until the year 1st or 2nd century, when the Christians themselves were being persecuted by the Roman Empire, I mean, many of them were, you know, went into the Colosseum and were martyred, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so just a theology grew up, but really the relationship, I mean, what the Christians didn't have anything on us, and we had nothing on the Christians. But that all changed in the early 4th century. From the early 4th century came along an emperor by the name of Constantine, who himself was a pagan. He was a pagan, but his mother was what we call a Fabrenta Christian. She was a very passionate Christian, and he fought a momentous battle, and there's legends about it, and well, he prayed the night before, and let's just say he won. He won, and he saw a vision with a cross, and in this sign you shall win. So next day he woke up, and he had all of his soldiers make the sign of the cross on their shields, and he fought the war, and guess what? He won. And had he lost, things would have been different. You know, just this is the flukes of history. You know, just hinges on one battle. Had he lost, he would have said, forget about the cross. Give me back the bagel. You know, he would have put a bagel on his shield. Who knows what he would have taken at that point. But he didn't. He won, and he made Christianity the official sanctioned religion of the Roman Empire. Okay? So all of a sudden, in 300 years, from starting out as a small sect, and not only a small sect, but after the destruction of the temple, we find an interesting thing. We hear nothing about the Jerusalem church anymore. Remember I mentioned to you about this argument between James and Paul. James being the leader of the Jerusalem church and Paul being the head of the outreach movement. It just basically, excuse me, I'm sorry. It basically fades away. We hear nothing anymore of the Jerusalem church itself, and James and all of the followers. We have no idea what happened to the Ebionites. We know what happened to the Jewish Christians. They just basically, I would say, more or less just assimilated in the larger population, and by that time it was a completely Gentile religion now. Completely Gentile religion. Constantine changed all of that, of course. Constantine now made it the official religion of the... Oh, go ahead.
What was the need, geopolitically or economically, for the early anti-Semitism?
You mean among the church fathers? Among the church fathers?
Well, amongst Mark.
Yeah, and there's... Oh, I think it's easy. I think every story has to have a hero and an antagonist. Here the hero, of course, was simply Jesus Christ. The antagonist became the Jewish people. I mean, you have to understand that this caused to the Christians a very, very strong theological problem. That the Jews were there. What was the problem? The problem was that if I'm telling you, I'm saying to you, that Jesus came as the Christ, Jesus came as the Messiah. Not only the Messiah, but they elevated it to 100 degrees, because it wasn't only the Messiah, he was now God. They elevated him to God. So if Jesus was God, and he came to save the world from sin, and we're all tainted, and this is the message that you have to accept, who saw him? Who did he live among? Who? The Jews, right? Who rejected him? The Jews. So it doesn't make any sense. So if you're telling me that's true, and he lived at a time when there were Jews, so why didn't the Jews accept him? I mean, if what you're saying is right, I mean, if I'm a preacher and I'm going out and I'm preaching to a Christian congregation, or just pretend that you're a bunch of pagans, and I'm trying to convince you to convert to Christianity, and I'm telling you that he was the Son of God, and he came to do all of these things, and he fulfilled miracles, and he did all of these miracles, and I'm telling you all of these great things that he lived, well, what are you going to say? You raise your hand. If you're a Talmudic scholar, if you're a smart person, you raise your hand and you say, okay, I believe all of what you say. I don't doubt it. But yet there's one question that I have in my mind is the people that lived at the time, by and large, now sure you had 500, 1,000 followers, but there were millions of Jews that lived in that period. Why didn't the Jews accept him? So they had to answer this question. They had to come up with some kind of a solution to say that there's something biologically wrong with the Jews. The fact that they had this opportunity, they missed an opportunity. It was like if you're sitting together with Bill Gates and he's creating Microsoft and he's asking you for an investment of $50 is going to make you a partner. And you say to yourself, nah, it's never going to go. It's never going to work. The guy is full of hot air. Okay? Now you think to yourself, oh my God, what am I doing? So that's the same thing here. They had the best opportunity to be saved and they rejected it. So you had to come up with some kind of an answer for this. So they said because the Jews are the devil. That's why the only way that they could have rejected this is that something has to be biologically wrong with them. They're crazy people. Not only are they crazy people, but they're evil and crazy. Not only did they reject Jesus, but they brought him to the cross. Think about it. God himself, they brought to the cross. Now, how do you commit deicide? It's not so easy killing a God. It's very hard because, you know, but Jews were able to do that. How? Because they went into partnership with the devil. They went into partnership. So this, now you know. So it was a perfect answer. A perfect answer for trying to explain to a pagan why he should accept Jesus when the people that lived among Jesus didn't accept him. Because they're cursed. And you see that? I'll show you. And I'll prove it to you that they're cursed. Look at them. Where are they today? And by this time, by the year 300, it's already more than 200 years that the Jews were exiled out of Israel. They're living in the diaspora. Look, they have no country. They're despised by everybody. They're small, etc., etc., etc. But then if somebody else raises their hand and say, but still, if you say that this is true, that Jews are a cursed people and they're something mentally deficient with them, that they had this opportunity for the greatest glory in the world and yet they rejected it, why are they still around? Why did God's wrath not come down heavy upon them and completely destroy them? Think about what they did. The worst sin that you could possibly do. You think adultery is bad. You think idolatry is bad. Murder. This is killing God. They took God's his lamb and they hung him up. So why are they still around? Which also confounded them. Why are Jews around? So there was a fellow by St. Augustine. You've heard of St. Augustine of Hippo. He was the bishop of Hippo in North Africa, and he came up with a new theory. He came up with the theory of the witness protection program. What's the witness protection program? That God has to keep the Jews around. Why? Because when Jesus will come back, he needs someone to say, we made a mistake. Because if it's all Christian and Jesus comes back to an all-Christian world, so what? Where everybody's going to be Christian. No. God is going to keep the Jews around. And he's going to save them. Albeit, we don't have to be friends with them. We don't like them. They're not good people. Stay away from them. But God is going to keep them around and we're going to try to protect them somewhat. You know, you could abuse them and you could chase them, you could exile them. Don't kill them. Because when Jesus comes back, they're going to be the ones that are going to have to stand up in front of the whole world and proclaim their mistake. So here they had a little tidy wrap-up on the Jewish issue. We hate them because they killed our God. We're never going to sanction their extermination because we need them around, but we don't want to be friends with them. And they instituted now, since in 325, they became the official religion in the Holy Roman Empire. It was now Christianity. They enacted various strict laws against the Jews. For example, a Jew could not employ a Christian. You know, intermarry, for sure not. You couldn't do that. A Jew couldn't teach Christians. Why? Because God forbid, if a Jew comes in to interact with a Christian, what's going to happen? He could, God forbid, convert a Christian to Judaism and lead them astray. And you know what that means? If you lead a Christian astray and convert them to Judaism, you could forget about it. This is like the worst thing. So they kept the Jews apart. There were some early church fathers and early bishops that advocated more than that. We should burn down the shoals. We should not let them have any synagogues. You know, really trample on them, etc., etc., back and forth and back and forth. But one thing we don't find really is the call for extermination in the church. The church never called for a wholesome, just kill them. It called for converting them off. You convert a Yid, you have the key to heaven. You got the key, you're in like Flynn. There's nothing to talk about. But complete annihilation, no. That was not part of the plan. Abuse them, do whatever you have to do with them. But don't kill them. Don't kill them. Okay. What happened? So what happened to the church? So now Constantine is from all of a sudden, from Christianity during his realm, which were maybe 10% of the Roman Empire, rushed up to about 50% of the Roman Empire. All of a sudden 50%. So it must have gone from, let's say, a few million people, 3 or 4 million, to maybe 20 million Christians in the world at that time under Constantine. There was one last hope. After Constantine, there was an emperor called Justin the Apostate. Or Julian the Apostate. Who was Julian the Apostate? He was a pagan, the last of the pagan emperors. And he said, nah, this whole Christianity business is too far out. We don't believe it. Let's go back to our pagan ways. He even was willing to pay the Jews to rebuild the temple. That's how far he wanted to go. He was going to give Jews money to rebuild the temple, bring it back to the days before this Narishkeit called Christianity. But unfortunately, in a war, he was killed, and that ended any sense of going back. From that day on, after Julian was killed, it all became completely Christian, and the Roman Empire eventually broke in two. The western part and the Byzantium, or the Byzantine Empire, the west went into what we call the 500-year deep freeze. Completely frozen. Completely. Was what we call in history the Dark Ages. Dark Ages, I mean literally, why? What happened? Because Rome was itself ransacked by whom? Not by Harvard professors. No, it was ransacked by barbarians. The Huns, the Vandals, all of these guys, tribes came and they ransacked Rome and they brought it down. It turned back culture and civilization about 500 years. Well, Rome had already almost indoor plumbing and they had all the other things. Everything went kaput. Everything went kaput. The eastern part of the Roman Empire still existed and was going strong, but the western part completely faded out. And with the fading out of the western part of the Holy Roman Empire, that kind of put the Jewish people in that side of the world also in a deep freeze. And there was basically nothing going on since when Rome fell in the year 410 till Charlemagne comes back much later on. There's basically nothing going on over there. What's happening in the East? So now I just brought this up as an introduction to give you a kind of a little understanding of how the relationship between Christianity and Judaism, whereas it should have, theoretically, it should have been two religions working side by side. Okay, you know what, you believe this, we believe that, you do this, we do that, okay, fine. Because after all, Jesus was a Jew. I mean, everybody admits that he was a Jew, but it didn't work out that way. It worked out that it was from day one, there was already antagonism between the two religions. I mean, we have a special blessing even in our prayer books against Christianity. If you look at Lamalshin, Malti Sikfa, if you look into the benedictions of the Amidah, we call it the Shmona Esrei. What does the Shmona Esrei mean? Shmona Esrei means 18. There's supposed to be 18 benedictions in this prayer, but there isn't. There's 19. Why is there 19? Because later on they included one against the Christians. And it basically reads, to the heretic there should be no hope, to the sinners there should be no salvation. I mean, it was not a nice prayer. It's not one of really loving kindness, but it's one literally to wipe out this sect called Christianity. But not in a physical war type of a cleansing, but God should take care of them by himself. Okay. If that's the case, the Jewish people and the Christians settled down into this antagonistic thing. By now there was many more Christians. They were much more powerful than the Jewish people. But since the world was in a deep freeze anyways, so was that part of the world, and we move on to the East. In the East is a much different story altogether. Why? Because after the destruction of the first temple, if you remember, we're going back now to about 400 or 500 BC. In the year 576, the temple is destroyed by Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar. And what does he do with the Jews? It tells us in the Chronicles, in the Bible, he moves them east. They literally go on a path that we can follow, tracking city by city through northern part of Israel, through Syria, into what was then the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian Empire was basically, if you look at the map today, you see it's Iraq, it's Syria, it's Israel, and it's parts of Iran. This was the Babylonian Empire. And he basically grabbed the Jews whatever he could and exiled them into this area. Later on, Jews even moved further east. How far east did they move? All the way to India. There were Jews that we found all the way in Haidu. Haidu was all the way, way far east along the trade routes. We talk about Marco Polo, but Marco Polo came much later. I mean, the Jews had already settled on that trade route hundreds and hundreds of years before then. And Jews found themselves at the farthest reach of the Persian Empire. We know this because we have a story called the Megillah, right? We call it the Megillah. And the Megillah is really the story of the Jewish people in the eastern part, or and that turned out to be the western part of the Persian Empire. They live in Iran. And they're there and they settle there and they prosper there. Not only do they prosper there, but miraculously they have a queen that's Jewish who has a son, Darius II, who's Jewish by birth, and he tries to build up the temple, and it gets built. It gets built, but like the Zionists will later find out 2,000 years later, when Ezra went back and he said, "Follow me, boys!" and he tries to come back to Israel, he turns around and there's not many followers. He comes back with very, very, very few people go back to Israel, even when they're allowed to go back. Why is that? Tell me.
They like it.
Because they like it.
Yeah.
They like it. They like living in Babylon. It's pagan, who cares? They like living in Persia. They get jobs, they speak Persian, they dress Persian. They're Persians. For all intents and purposes, they're Persians. Because Jews, as we often seen in history, are the chameleons of the world. You drop them anywhere. Drop them in Yemen, they become Yemenites. You drop them in Russia, they become Russians. You drop them in Lithuania, they become Litvaks. What can you do? Yeah, you drop them in America, what happens to them? They become what? They become Yankee fans. That's it. That's it. Okay? There you go. You got them going. Okay, so you see that? So you see that? Jews are the chameleons of the world. They have this adaptability like no other people have. The assimilation moves quickly. We learn immediately quickly how to adapt, and we do it well. We do it well. Okay? So this was no different to the Jews that lived in Babylon and in Persia. They became Babylonians and they became Persians. So as the wars were fought between Babylon and Persia, eventually Persia beat Babylon and knocked out the Nebuchadnezzar. They became the powerhouse over there. Jews were right there and then. Jews were right there. So after the destruction of the second temple, when the Roman emperor chased the Jews out, it wasn't that he was chasing them to a land that were no Jews already. Jews already lived in Babylon for hundreds of years, and they lived in Persia for hundreds of years. So all you had to do was just go from Israel right into Babylon. And guess what they even had there? They had schools, and they had yeshivas, and they had everything that you would love, like New York City. Go to New York City, you could think that you're walking around in Tel Aviv. Who needs Israel? You go to New York, to places like Borough Park, Flatbush, Crown Heights, and Williamsburg, it's predominantly Jewish. Who needs to go to Tel Aviv? As a matter of fact, I would say that Borough Park is probably more predominantly Jewish than any part of Israel. Because in Israel, you have different nationalities living there. In Borough Park, it's almost 100% Jewish. For blocks and blocks and blocks, all you see is Hasidim and other Hasidim, and then more Hasidim, a few Misnagdim, and then more Hasidim, and then go to Flatbush, you see the Misnagdim. It's unbelievable what's going on in New York. And that's basically what Babylon was like. Jews then went to Babylon, and in Babylon they already established a whole infrastructure of Judaism, an entire infrastructure, ready to go. By the 1st and 2nd century, that was already an entire commerce built up of Jewish business people, cities, Baghdad, Surah, I mean, all of these places already had huge Jewish populations. And not only were they there as foreigners, but they integrated themselves in the community. And and the advantage was that Christianity never penetrated into Babylon. Never went into Babylon. They remained pagans. The Arab tribes that lived at that time never converted to Christianity. Now, they fought against Christians, they fought wars against the Christians, they fought wars against the Parthians, but basically in that part of it, where you look now, Saudi Arabia, and in that area, Christianity never made it over there. Christianity moved west out of Israel. So if you're thinking of the map, you look up, you see they went north to Turkey, and from Turkey they spread out all over Europe, and they spread out all over North Africa, and there was churches along North African seacoast, but east, it never penetrated. So Jews did not have the same problems in Babylon as they had in the Christian countries. No one was accusing them of deicide in Babylon. No one was accusing them of any type of harassment. Now, what kind of religion did we find at that point? So it was a number of different waves, because nothing really stays forever. So for the most part, they were pagans, but every once in a while, a new religion popped up, like one of the religions, which was an ancient Persian religion called Zoroastrianism. You've heard of Zoroaster. Zoroaster was a god, basically, that they believed, the Zoroastrians believe, in that there's two gods, God of good and a God of evil. A God of good and a God of evil. And these two gods do battle over the dominion of the world. And either you're with God, the good God, or you're against the good God. That's it. They make it very simple. You're either with us or you're against us. Well, they asked Jews, are you with us or against us? What did the Jews say? Nothing. So they forbade. So for a little while, it became pretty hot in the 5th century when there was these fanatical Zoroastrians that took over Persia and Babylon. They put the squeeze to the Jewish people. I'll give you one example. What I mean by that, they forbade the Jewish people from studying Torah. Why? Because what does Torah represent? What's the most famous verse in the entire Torah? What do you say? That's good, but Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael probably encapsulates the whole theology of what Judaism believes. Hashem Elokeinu, God is our God. Hashem Echad, God is one. Now, that doesn't play very well with Zoroastrian, right? Because they would say God is two. Exactly. God is two. So now God our I don't know, it depends what part of where you come from. Okay? So now Jews got a problem. Because here comes these Zoroastrians that believe in the duality of God, and Judaism believes in monotheism. So they forbade Jews from studying Torah and from practicing Judaism for a little while, as long as there was fanatics about it. One of the things that we find is, I'll ask you a good question. We daven Musaf every week, right? We daven here, Musaf is the additional service on Shabbat, and there's a prayer there called Keser. And we say Keser, and we all sing Keser. All of a sudden in Keser, the Shema Yisrael pops in. Shema Yisrael. Now how did it get in there? Shema Yisrael is supposed to be in the Shacharis service. We've already said it. We said it when we took out the Torah. But why is Shema Yisrael in Keser? How did Shema Yisrael get into Keser, into this additional service on Shabbat? The answer is that during this period, the Zoroastrians were smart, but not smarter than Jews. There's nobody that knows how to make a knedel and a dreidel like a Jew. So they said, you know what, you're forbade from studying Torah, and you're absolutely forbade from saying Shema Yisrael, because Shema Israel, Hero Israel, really undermines the entire theology of Zoroastrianism. So Jews said, you're right, we're never going to say, and as a matter of fact, look, we're taking it out of our morning service. Little did they know, they put it into Keser. Because Keser, well, they don't know that. They know that Keser. Well, what's Keser? What's Shmesser? They don't know what Keser is. So the Jews snuck in Shema Yisrael into Keser, so no one should know that it's even in the prayer book. This is how you have to maneuver around when you're a minority among a hostile majority. So that's how Keser got into the davening. Nothing fancy about that. It wasn't a printer's mistake. It was during this period. Eventually, these fanatics also, kind of died out and went their way, and the paganism, went back into vogue into this part of the country. The Jews themselves lived an interesting existence there, basically with the great yeshivas, with the great places of study. The Jews were able to really, really establish a foothold and make it very comfortable for Jews. Because what do Jews need? A, you need a shul. You need a place of worship, which they had. B, you need a kosher butcher, no problem. And C, you need a place of study, which they had. Two great yeshivas, two wonderful, not only great yeshivas, we can't even imagine the kind of scholarship that went on in these yeshivas. In Surah and Pumbedisa, it was just unbelievable what kind of scholarship went on there. As a matter of fact, the entire Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, is based upon the scholars and the students that learned in these yeshivas. I mean, imagine that. So you could be sitting you walk into the room one day and you could be sitting, and Rav, who was the founder of the yeshiva in Surah, could be standing up and giving a lecture, and at his feet you can find these brilliant geniuses all sitting around him, and these people themselves then later became rabbis, and they had students. It was an unbelievable flourishing time for Jewish scholarship during that period. It's incredible what we were able to accomplish, in Babylon. And how the community functioned was very simple. There was two positions of power. Because basically, if you live in a pagan society, you will notice those people that study Roman history, pagans generally leave you alone. They don't care. You want to be Jewish, Moish. What do they care? They themselves are not that fanatical. I mean, as long as you don't try to overthrow us, as long as you don't try to become, throw us out of the country and a revolution, what do we care? You want to be Jewish? Fine, go ahead, study Judaism. You want to be a Kabbalist? Be a Kabbalist. You want to be a Misnagid? A Misnagid. They don't care. Whatever you want, because they're not that passionate about their religion, because they themselves change every 5 minutes, for some other god. So they allowed the Jews to do whatever they want. There was 2 seats of power. Seat number 1 was called the Reish Galusa, the Exilarch. The Exilarch was a political position, and the Exilarch had to be a descendant of the tribe of Judah. And not only a descendant of the tribe of Judah, but also had to be a descendant of the house of David. Why? Because they believed that if Mashiach is going to come back, this is going to be the guy. He's going to be the Mashiach because he's a direct lineage from the house of David, and he became, quote unquote, what we call the Resh Galusa, the head of the exile, or the Exilarch, as we would call it in English. And he basically ran the political situation of the Jews in Babylon at that time. You needed roads, you needed a shul, you needed this, you needed that. This is what he did. And he had the strength and the power to tax the Jewish community, to collect taxes from the Jewish community, to put people into excommunication if they didn't pay their taxes. He had all that power within his hand, to do that. At the same time, there was what we call a Goan. The Goan. The Goan was, in English, basically means the genius, and he was the head of the yeshiva. He was the dean of the yeshiva. And since there was 2 yeshivas, there was always at least 2 Goanim, 2 Goans. And they basically ran all of the spiritual, religious aspects of the community. Means, is the mikveh kosher? You go to the Goan. Is this good? You go to the Goan. You did this? Now, in theory, this is a beautiful, what we call separation of powers. But only in theory. Right? It's only in theory. Why? Because to give you another example, there was once a great rabbi by the name of the Ger Rebbe, the Chadushei Arim. The Chadushei Arim was a student of Reb Mendel of Kotsk. For those that know a little bit about Hasidic history, Reb Mendel of Kotsk was a firebrand. He was a man that didn't accept anything less than complete 100% honesty. And the Chadushei Arim, the first Ger Rebbe, was his student. When his son got married, the Chadushei Arim called them in and said, "Children, let me give you a good piece of advice." This is a young married couple standing in front of the father. And he said, "Listen." He turns to his daughter-in-law and says, "Dear daughter-in-law, my son doesn't know much about the outside world. His whole life was surrounded by yeshiva. He's a yeshiva boy. He doesn't know much. So you know what? When it comes to issues of Judaism and spirituality, you should let him make the decisions. Because that's what he knows. That's what he's been taught." Then he looks to his son. He says, "Son, you don't know nothing about running a household. You don't know nothing about shopping, of keeping a house. All questions about that, you should go to your wife. You should defer to your wife. So like this, you'll have a happy marriage. You'll run one part of the family, you'll run the other part of the family, and everybody will be, as we call it, Shalom al Yisrael. There'll be peace in Israel." Has there ever been peace in Israel? No, no. Even when there's no Arabs, there's no peace in Israel. Even when the Arabs back off, there's no peace in Israel. So the first Shabbos, they're married, they have the Sheva Brachas, everybody else, everybody goes home. Now they set up shop. He's in charge of all spiritual matters. She's in charge of all materialistic matters. It works fine for the first 2 days. Comes Friday night, he's in shul, he's davening, then he looks around the shul, he sees guests. To bring home guests for a Friday night meal is an unbelievable mitzvah. It's called Achmasas Archim, inviting guests to spend time at your house. Abraham suffered for this. Remember back in the old days, Abraham, after his circumcision, sat out there in the tent, if you remember that story in the Bible, and he was looking for visitors. This is how great the mitzvah of having guests in your home. So he goes and he takes home about 15 guests. He marches them to his house, knocks on the door, he says, "Chana, look at this, 15 guests for Friday night meal." She starts screaming, "Are you crazy? How do you bring home 15 guests for Friday night meal? I didn't cook, I didn't prepare, I have nothing." He says, "But Dad said I'm in charge of the spiritual." She says, "But you idiot. To be in charge of the spiritual, bring home guests, means you have to have chicken and salad and fish and all of that." And since that day, they never got along. That was it. Because in theory, he's supposed to run the spiritual and she's supposed to run the physical, but it never works out that way. And the same thing was true about the Resh Galusa and the Goan. Between the Exilarch and the Goan never worked out that way, because every issue, not every issue, there were many periods when they got along, especially if one of them was more powerful than the other. If the Exilarch had a very, very strong personality and the Goan was kind of a weak person, even though he might have been brilliant, but he was not a fighter, not a politician, then most of the things went the Exilarch way. If, on the other hand, the Exilarch was a weak guy and the Gaon was a strong personality, as there were many Gaonim were in that time were very, very strong and rigid personalities, then it went the other way. But many times, war. Many times there was war between the two of them, or between the three of them, because there was three places of power that they couldn't get along. But as far as the outside authorities were concerned, as far as the pagans, who cares? You know, there's an interesting story. That's just a little sidebar, a very, very small sidebar, but an interesting one. If you look on the map of the world, and you focus now around the Persian Gulf and around Saudi Arabia, and you go a little bit west, on the bottom is a country called Yemen. Right. Yemen, right? Yemen enters into the Persian, into the, on the other end, into the other end, and it's a very small country, but with a long, long history. Jews have been there for over 2,000 years in Yemen. Tayman, as we would call it. Taymani, okay? They tell a story in the year 425, there was a small Arab tribe, because that's basically how they lived, in tribes. They were tribal. And in this little town, there was run by this Abu Akbar, I think his name was called, you know? And he one day got very ill. One day got very, very ill. And he almost bought the farm, as they say. Who should be in town but none other than Dr. Shapiro? Okay? Dr. Shapiro was in town that day. They summoned Dr. Shapiro to Akbar, or whatever his name was, Abu Akbar, and they bring him in there, and he cures him. He cures him. Who knows what he had? He might have had the common cold for all we know. Could have had an upset stomach. We don't know exactly the circumstances. But he was so thankful to him that he had his entire tribe convert. He converted to Judaism, and he had the whole tribe convert to Judaism. Yeah. His name was no more Akbar. His name now become Ben Yosef, Joseph. He took the name of Joseph in the Old Testament. He thought of Joseph. His name was now Yosef, and everybody in that tribe converted. It became a completely Jewish tribe, and he honored the doctor, and it was unbelievable. Okay, you know what happens with converts? Not always, but sometimes they become very zealous, very zealous. And this Yosef was, you know what, the Middle Eastern people, they have a temper, you know, and they're very passionate people. They're not rational. They're not like the Germans, cold, detached. No. They're very passionate. Oh, she's laughing. She knows. You know, okay, the Germans, all right? Am I wrong? No, I'm right, eh? I'm right. I tell you, the Germans, thinkers, Kopmenschen, heart, forget about it. Thinkers, right? Moses Mendelssohn, okay? Okay? But in the Middle East, in that part of the world, it's all about passion. It's all about heart. So if they love you, they love you. And if they hate you, they really hate you. They really hate you. So this guy became a Brenter Jew. He became a real zealous Jew. And he heard that the Christians up north, especially in the Byzantine Empire, were harassing Jews. So he summarily grabbed, independently, 4 Christian businessmen that were doing business, and he hung them. Whoa. For no reason. For no reason. They weren't bothering anybody, but he said, "You're Christian? Good, let's hang them." Okay? And he thought he was doing the right thing because he was protecting his brothers up north. Little did he understand, he didn't get it, that you don't do any favors to the people living up north when hanging 4 Christian business people. So the Christian emperor from the Byzantines heard that this guy was hanging Christians. He sent down an army to fight against this guy Yosef. Now Yosef was probably a nice guy, but I think he was not. Well, let's just put it this way: he would not challenge Machiavelli. Let's put it that way. In political acumen, let's put it that way. He probably was a good guy to have for a minion, but no, you know. So they sent down an army and they destroyed these people. They literally wiped them out. I mean, he couldn't compete with with a huge army from the empire. But that was just a little side note that I've never seen the story, except that one history book retells the story of this little community. All of this changed in the 7th century. Everything changed in that region by the 7th century. Because what happened? In the year 570, he was born to a lady called Amina. His mother was Amina, his father was Abdul, his name was Mohammed. He came into being in Saudi Arabia. At 40 years old, in the year 610, he had a revelation that the angel Gabriel came to him and taught him the whole Quran, taught him literally the new book. He was a man that wasn't going to, he wasn't going to be put down easy. He started a religion, as we know today, called Islam. Okay? Islam took a lot from Judaism. I mean, they have laws of kosher, even though he didn't accept the Old Testament as the Christians accepted the Old Testament, because the Quran is a whole new book and it's a whole new theory and everything is new about the Quran. But many of the rules and the regulations, he came into contact with Jews. There were Jews in Medina, and there were Jews in Mecca, and there were Jews all over the place. And he encountered them, and he had business partners that they were Jews. Now, Muhammad came out of the cave and started this religion called Islam, which means subservient. Islam literally means to be subservient. That's what the religion is all about. Just to follow the word of God. There's nobody, God is one, Allah Akbar, God is great, and there's only one God and there's one prophet. And that prophet is Muhammad. But he wasn't done. He wasn't done. He didn't knock out Moses and Jesus altogether. He also claimed that Jesus was a true prophet, although not God, obviously, and Moses was a true prophet, not God. But the real true prophet, the one that came after everybody, because when the coming of the Messiah, Jesus will be there and Moses will be there, and they'll all say that Muhammad was right. Okay? Now, a guy, there was about maybe in the history of the world 5 million people like Muhammad. Every second guy starts a new religion. Who doesn't start a new religion? I myself am trying to start a new religion. It's not going out that well. I'm the only adherent to this new religion. Okay, but that's the way it goes. He was a man of tremendous fortitude, obviously. He was a man that didn't take no for an answer. He was shrewd, he was charismatic, he was vicious, he was kind, he was compassionate. He was everything that you could think about a guy, and he was successful. That's the bottom line. He was successful. And he was successful in converting the Arab nations into Islam. Now, and most of the tribes in Saudi Arabia, eventually, by the time that he died in 632, they already had a whole administration and a religion, and a theology. Everything was already in place. And they came up with a theory, at that time was heard, the word that we hear today, called jihad. Jihad, which is a holy war. Okay? Because Muhammad taught that this is Catholic. Islam is Catholic. And what do I mean by when I say Islam is Catholic? Islam is universal. Judaism is the only one of the 3 religions that is not universal. It's exclusive. You have to convert to Judaism, and you don't and if you want to be a Jew, but there's no necessity upon you. You could be a wonderful, wonderful Gentile, a righteous Gentile, a good Gentile, a caring Gentile, and you go straight to heaven. No problem. There's no need for you to convert to Judaism. If you're a Jew, you have to live by the rules. But if you're a Gentile, you have 7 rules. Do this, do that, you're going to go to heaven. Christianity changed that. Christianity became Catholic. It became universal. Everybody needs Jesus. You can't say you're out of the realm. You need Jesus to get you to heaven. You need Jesus for salvation. And Islam is also Catholic. Islam didn't claim, no, we're only here for the Muslim. We're only here for the Arabs. We're here for everybody. Allah is a universal God. And everybody needs to believe in the one true God called Allah. Now, between the years 650 and 750, which is 100 years, which is in history not such a long time. If you're living it, it's pretty slow. It's day after day after day. But in 100 years, do you know what the Muslims were able to do? Come out of, they were nothing, they were nobody. Who were the Muslims? There were a few Arab tribes living in Saudi Arabia. They moved west through the North Africa. They captured all of North Africa. They captured all of Israel. They captured all of Turkey. They were already standing at the gates of Vienna. At the gates of Vienna. Right? And up to Spain, they were at the Pyrenees. They were going to go in, they were marching into France already. You think about it. You think about it. For a religion that started off in infancy, they had captured most of the world. They had knocked out the Christians all out of Europe except for Vienna and France. And it was just, they could have done it too. Had they prolong it a little more, but everything else fell to the Muslims. You may ask yourself, how did they do this? Very simply. I'll tell you why. The Western world was constantly in battle, constantly fighting. The Byzantines were fighting against the Parthians. The western part of the thing was downtrodden. It was constant flux and battles. Who are the only ones that were rested? The Arabs. The Arabs never fought. They never fought great wars. So here they were, thousands of these warriors, pumped up by religion, pumped up by, by this belief that they're going to bring good to the world, my way or the highway. And they went. And there was 100 years, by the time 800 came around, they were sitting already peacefully in Spain. They were already well ensconced in Spain, all through North Africa, Israel, Turkey, everywhere else. Everywhere else. Southern Russia even. They were all over the world. All over the world. Okay? What does it have to do with us? With the Jewish people? And what was the relationship of early Islam to the Jewish people? Now, the good news is Muhammad died with a smile on his face. Wasn't hanging from a cross, and that makes a huge difference. Huge difference. He was surrounded by wives and children, and he had disciples, and he had grandchildren, and there was already a hierarchy, and there were successors. He didn't die in agony and in pain. But in the Quran, now here's already where politics gets involved in it. In the Quran, you read a number of different attitudes toward Jews. You can read one that Islam is a religion of peace, and that it only wants peace and only cares about peace, and it's not here to disrupt anybody, and it's everybody could live, in peace and in harmony. That's one part of the Quran. The other part of the Quran you could read, Islam came here to subdue everybody, and everybody must believe, and we have to go to war against the infidels. You could read that too. Fine. So both is true. Muhammad was very vicious against Jews. Why? Because he fell into the same mistake as many people do. We'll see it later on with Martin Luther, who falls into the same very mistake. Believing that, why Jews are not converting to Christianity? Because they're mean. The Christians are mean people, but I'll be nice to the Jews. I'll extend an olive branch to them. They'll definitely convert. They won't. They're crazy, the Jews. They're stiff-necked people. Okay. So he fought against the Jews, and he killed a number of people in Medina. So in that aspect, it wasn't such a great relationship. But as the Arabs drove out from the Arabian Peninsula, and we're going to concentrate on the North Africa route, and they started to capture. Now think about this. One nation after nation fell. First Egypt, then Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Spain. All of these places fell one after the other like a domino effect. Okay? Now, if you're in Spain, you need what to fight a war? Supplies. Now, how do you get supplies? You need arms, you need other stuff, you need camels, you need horses, you need swords, you need shields. Where does this come from? This comes from back home or wherever they're manufacturing it. Who supplies the trade routes?
Jews.
Of course. They allowed the Jews to follow along and to establish little communities all along this area. So now you have Jewish communities which already existed before. You had Jews already in Libya, and you had Jews in Tunisia, and you had Jews in Morocco, and all of these. And Jews, communicated quickly with each other. They spoke a language. They created credit. You can get things quickly, food, goods, arms, whatever you needed. And they were able to pass it along. And as for most part, especially the Arabs that had conquered, the Arab tribes that had conquered North Africa, especially Morocco and what we call today Algeria, and Spain, which was primarily the Berbers and the Moors. And the Berbers and the Moors were what we would call enlightened Arab tribes. Meaning, what does enlightened Arab tribes mean? Means that they allowed for other people to live. They weren't going to squash other people's religion. They believed in religious freedom to a certain extent, because they themselves believed very much in philosophy and in poetry, and they wrote philosophy and they put poetry. I mean, if you read Arab culture, they love to talk. Oh, did they love to talk? They love. You see them in the Middle East. They talk and they negotiate and they love it. This is their life. Their life. If you go to an Arab shuk and you ask a guy, how much is this? He says 30 shekels. And you offer 30 shekels, he gets insulted. Because he wants you to bargain. What do you mean you're not bargaining? Now you're supposed to say 10. He says 28. You say 12. Eventually it ends up like 20. Now that's a deal. But if you give him 30 shekels, it doesn't. They love to talk. They love this. And their writings and their philosophy and their music and their poetry.
Algebra.
What? And algebra and all of this stuff they had with them. And Jews fell into that milieu. Jews love to read, and Jews love to write, and they love to philosophize, they love to argue. So to them it was a perfect marriage, except for one thing. The Jews were in a status of what they called dhimmi. Dhimmi meant you're basically a second-class citizen. No Jew could rule over a Muslim. That you couldn't do. You could work for a Muslim, you could make him money, you could do everything, but you cannot be the ruler over a Muslim. You had to have the status of a second-class citizen. It means you can have a shul, you could daven your shul, do whatever you want, but you could never ever aspire to be the leader of a country, of a community, of a county, of a city, of anything. That had to fall into the hands of the Muslims. And as long as you were willing to live that kind of a life, as long as you were willing to sit there and to accept, hey, you know what, I'm a second-class citizen, I'm never going to be the mayor, I'm never going to be this, that's fine, great, no problem. If you weren't, then you had a problem. So Jews living in Morocco and in Spain around the 8th and the 9th and the 10th centuries prospered. We call this the golden age of Spain. I mean, there were Jews that were living among the Muslims and they were prospering. I'll just give you one example. Chazdai ibn Shaprut. There was a Jewish fellow by the name of Chazdai. Ibn is son of Shaprut. He lived in the 10th century. And he rose up to such a point where he was literally the prime minister of Spain. Literally, not the caliph, because the caliph was number one guy. But he was an enlightened Arab ruler. He was the head guy. But Chazdai ibn Shaprut did everything for him. Ran his business, was a warrior, was a scholar, was everything. We know a lot about this guy, Chazdai ibn Shaprut, because he wrote books and he wrote other stuff, so we know what was going on in the 10th century. As a matter of fact, interestingly enough, as a sidebar, you know there's a book called the Kuzari. You've heard of the book called the Kuzari? The Kuzari, you've heard of the Rabbi Judah Levi, wrote a book called the Kuzari. Kuzari is a book of Jewish philosophy. But it's based on a legend which later turned out to be true, that there was a tribe living in southern Russia. Like you look at right now, you have all these Azerbaijan and Armenia, where all these places are. There was a tribe there called the Khazars. And the Khazars were Jewish. This one Russian tribe, or whatever, I don't even think they're Russian, but there's one tribe up there was Jewish. How did they end up to be Jewish? Now, how do we know about them? Because as Chazdai, this guy Chazdai traveled for the caliph, he ended up running into an ambassador of Turkey that told them, you know, it's an interesting thing, but there are people that live up in the steppes of Russia they're Jewish, they're called the Khazars. He didn't believe it, so he wrote a letter to King Bulan, B-U-L-A-N, who was the head of this Khazar kingdom, and he wrote him a letter to say, if it's true, is this true that you're Jewish? Well, you know how the U.S. Postal Service works. You send a letter, he got an answer back 3 years later. With confirmation, literally with confirmation, that yes, we exist, and there's a story behind it, and etc. And this was recorded by, later on, a great Spanish rabbi and philosopher, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, that wrote the book called Hakuzari, which is basically a book of Jewish philosophy, and how the Khazars became to be Jewish. But this was only through the influence of someone like Chazdai ibn Shaprut, someone that had the clout to be able to get the word out and to help and to send money and to support. This is already the level of where Jews were able to rise within the Muslim culture. Now, of course, you could say that he might have been an exception, but he wasn't. There's Rabbi Shmuel HaNagid, Rabbi Shmuel the leader. There were many, many Jews at that period in Morocco and in North Africa and in Spain that rose up to great levels of prominence among the Muslims. And the Muslims allowed this. Now, they weren't always peaceful. They weren't always nice, and they weren't always forgiving. There were many times, and we'll get into this, maybe not this week, but next week we'll get into when you turn fundamentalist. And there were times that there were fundamentalist tribes within the thing. Now, go ahead, Mom.
What was it like in Egypt and Libya and other parts of North
It's a good question. It's a very good question. We're going to start with Babylon and move westward, and we'll see what happens. What happens is that as one nation is rising, as far as Judaism goes, as one area is rising, which I'm talking about Spain, where the west is rising, the east is diminishing. So what happens is in 1 century, from the 8th through the 9th century, close to 150,000 Jews move out of Babylon. That's an enormous amount of people moving out at one time out of Babylon. What happens is that the communities in Babylon and in Israel and in Egypt begin to diminish. They begin to lose clout, whereas they had all the clout. I mean, think about that. Babylon was the center of Torah. If there's any question that came out, it was Babylonians. They were the ones that made all the rules and regulations for the Jews. And now all of a sudden people are running to the west. Who wants to stay here in Baghdad? Who wants to stay here in all of these places? We're going to where the money is. And where was the money? Where was the power? Spain. Spain and in Morocco. So these places, the ones closer to Spain and Morocco prospered. The later ones diminished. And we have evidence of what happens is, and we're just going to open up the questions and answers to what we call the legend of the 4 rabbis. What is the legend of the 4 rabbis? It went something like this. The yeshiva, and next week we're going to start, because there's just not enough time today, we're going to start with a most interesting fellow by the name of Reb Sadia Gaon. And we want to talk a little bit about him next week, and we'll start him off on our lecture. But I'm going to jump over him because he's such a fascinating guy, and I don't want to give him a short shrift, 2 minutes. So after Reb Sadia passes away, the yeshiva goes in complete despair. There's no money to keep the yeshiva. This is a yeshiva that ran from the year 100 to almost 900, 800 years. The yeshiva is running in Surah. There's no money. Boy, don't we know what that feels like in America? A yeshiva with no money. That's like, it's an oxymoron. It's redundancy. A redundancy. So what they do is they send out 4 rabbis to go fundraise. Okay? I'm going to have to refer here because I don't want to mess up their names. 4 fine guys. Okay? Their names was Reb Shmayahu, Reb Chuskel, Reb Moshe, and Reb Chanoich. These 4 guys they send out to fundraise for this yeshiva because Surah is almost closing, and they didn't want it to close. But that just gives you an idea of what it's like. It's almost like in Eastern Europe when there was the mass exodus that came to America. So when they had to raise money for the yeshivas in Lithuania and in Poland, where'd they come to? They come to America. They come to the United States. So these 4 got on a boat, and they set out sail that they're going to end up raising money for the yeshiva in Surah. At that time, there was a very big business in pirating. Pirates. So they got on this boat, and they stopped the boat. The pirates got on the boat. They captured everybody. They took all of the loot, and they were going to kill everybody because that's the way of the pirates. You don't leave any witnesses behind. Except when someone told Blackfoot or whoever was the head pirate, they said, hey, 1 second. You have very valuable loot here. What do you mean valuable loot? He says, these 4 guys, they're called rabbis. And rabbis are in short supply in North Africa. Because as the communities grew, but there was no rabbis to really administer to them. Because the businessmen ran first, establish a community, move on, establish another community. But now you need rabbis. I'm telling you, he guy says to him, if you let out the word, send out the word throughout the world that you have 4 rabbis on your boat, you're going to see they're going to ransom them. And the Jews like to ransom each other. He figures, right? For a few bucks, what does he care? Better alive than dead. He sends out the word, and kachava. Such was the story. The story was that communities said, yes, we will ransom, we'll pay the price on one condition. And that condition is that they must stay in this community. We're not going to ransom them and let them go back to Babylon. They're going to stay wherever we ransom, they're going to stay. And that what happened was, so listen, the Jews in Alexandria ransomed Reb Shmayahu. They paid off him and they took him to be their rabbi. The Jews in Tunisia ransomed Reb Chuskel. And the Jews in Cordoba, Spain ransomed Rabbi Moshe, which is kind of ironic because next week we're also going to talk about a Cordobian by the name of Reb Moshe, but this was not him. It was not the Rambam. And his son Chanoch. These 4 guys ended up in 4 different communities, 3 different communities. They stayed there. And this is really the story of how the Babylonian Empire went down, and now the new empire in the West was rising, the golden age of Spain. And next week we'll pick it up by talking about, we'll start off by talking about one of the great Gaonim, one of the truly great geniuses of all time. Of all time. And he definitely goes into the Jewish Hall of Fame, if not in the top 10, definitely in the top 12. I would put him in, is of course the famous Rabbi Gaon, and we'll pick up the story from there. All right? Okay. You know, and unfortunately, it's a two-parter, but this really deserves really much more elaborate. But if there's any questions, or else I'm gonna talk about Zach, please. And I want to give Zach a yashar for coming all the way from Los Angeles for here. Yeah, thank you. Zach's an old friend of ours who was with Chabad in California since day one. When Chabad was started here in California, Zach was one of the first members of Chabad here. Been around for 5 or 6 weeks. Thanks. You got the If you want to know anything about Rabbi Kunin, Zach's can give you the history. But Zach wants to know. Let me paraphrase your question, Zach, to see if it's right. And I might have to answer this question off camera because I don't know. Nowadays, I mean, I talked about the relationship of Jews and the church and all of that stuff, and it wasn't a good relationship. Very, very poor relationship early on. Now in America, we fast forward a couple of thousand years, and we're in Israel, and we're having all of these problems in the Middle East. Israel is not a much beloved country. It's a poor country. It's ostracized by many people. Certainly the Muslim world ostracizes it, and even among Christians, but in America, we have seemingly one strong constituency that is very friendly to the state of Israel, raises big bucks for the state of Israel, and promotes the state of Israel, goes out of its way for the state of Israel, and that's, of course, the fundamentalists. The fundamentalists, the people like Jerry Falwell, the people like Pat Robertson, the people like Tom DeLay, the fundamentalists who are on the forefront of, when there's this whole Zionist Christian nexus, and they go to Israel, they raise money for Israel. The pastor down here at the Calvary Church, right in Santana, it's a huge, huge church. His name is Pastor Smith, but what's his first name? Not John, but Pastor Smith. I mean, he started the Calvary movement basically down here in Santana. If you know anything familiar with the Calvary movement, it's a very fundamentalist Christian movement. They believe in the Bible. He goes every year with a $1 million check that he raises from his church. He meets with the prime minister. He shakes his hand. He presents the $1 million to whoever is the prime minister at that time. And they're very good friends with the state of Israel. Now, how do you reconcile this? I mean, basically from our history, we've been antagonistic to the Christians, and now all of a sudden, the Christians seem to be our best friend. Is that basically, did I summarize it correctly, Zach? Basically, that's basically why. Why are they good to us? Or what? Well, I'll tell you, they're good to us, I believe, because they believe wholeheartedly that Jesus will not come back until Jews fulfill their side of the bargain. Meaning that they got to go back to Israel, and in Israel there's got to be the Armageddon, and there's got to be the apocalypse, and this is all part of the process, all part of it. And as long as Israel is around, and it's in Jewish hands, and not in Muslim hands, there's a chance that Jesus is going to come back. And so we're going to have to support this at all costs. We got to do whatever we can to make this happen. We got to make this happen. On our side, why we take their money is because we don't have many friends in the world. I mean, Israel is isolated. The fundamentalists in America, which estimates around 35 million to 50 million, consider themselves evangelical Christians. It's a huge block within the country, have a big say. Many of them are our good friends on Capitol Hill. I mean, travel to Israel. Yeah, so Israel says, Lama alai. Why not? You know why? You know what? If this Pastor Smith came tonight and said, Rabbi, I want to help the Shul by the Shore with $1 million, well, what am I going to say? Lie? I'm going to say no. Now, of course, it makes us feel uncomfortable because they're not shy about, and they're not abashed about their agenda. Their agenda is to bring Jesus back to the world. That's their agenda. And if the Jews play a part in it, and if they're going to convert and whatever it is, it's going to hasten it, so be it. So they're right out in front with it. They're not devious and say, no, we love you. We love you. We want to convert you. Okay, so they have an agenda. Well, so far, I don't know if they'll go that far here. I haven't heard that far yet. So I say, if I was the Prime Minister of Israel, I'd take their help. There's no question about it. I would definitely take their help because I'm an isolated guy. I don't have where to turn to. I could turn to Canada. I mean, who support Canada? Ecuador, Bolivia. I need any help that I can get. And if this is a voice that's going to help me, I'll have no problem taking their money. The fact is that it's our responsibility. The Jews' responsibility is to strengthen our faith in our children. And when we're encountered with this attack upon us, theologically attack upon us, then we have to, hold back and say, hey, wait a second. I like to dance, but no further. I'm not ready to shack up for the evening. But that's our responsibility. This is my own personal opinion. This is not Torah's Lokshen. You're asking, I'm just asking, this is Perelmuter's opinion this is not the Lubavitcher Rebbe's opinion, this is not Chabad's opinion, this is and I'm telling it straight into the camera, this is my own personal opinion. I do not speak for any other Chabad rabbi. When I say this, it's just a disclaimer because I don't want, to come down and say, hey. But that's what I think really the position. All of this is really, what we're dealing with now is geopolitics. We're talking about geopolitics right now. Israel, today, I just saw today an article by Joseph Farah. Joseph Farah is the editor of the World News Network, what does he call themselves? World News Network or World, very, very pro-Israel. Very, very pro-Israel. Right wing, he's an Arab, by the way. Lebanese father, Lebanese parents. Joseph Farah, you could read his, all the time. World News Network, World Nets, I don't remember exactly. But today I just saw an article from him saying he's not supporting Israel anymore. Why is he not supporting Israel anymore? He says he's had it up to here. Israel wants to commit suicide. They could commit the suicide on themselves because he's a believer. Don't give back 1 inch. Don't, there was a Gaza disengagement was a terrible mistake. A real right-winger. And he keeps begging the state of Israel not to do anything. You're literally killing yourself. And now he's coming here to America. He claims that Olmert is coming here to America to convince the American Congress to buy into this plan of disengagement again from the West Bank. So he says, I'm going to pray for Israel, but I can't anymore. For 20 years, he says, 20 years I've been on the forefront of supporting it and rallying in and this, and then they don't listen. It falls on deaf ears. So you have this kind of politics that's going on now in the world. It's strange. We're not used to it because, normally we've aligned ourselves more with the left than with the extreme right here, in the country because Jews by nature and by far are much more democratic. You're talking 80-20 at the best is Democratic to Republican. The evangelicals, on the contrary, are 97-3 Republicans. I think the 3% of them are Democrats, and even the 3 are teetering. So you have these two groups that are. But in real politics, listen, AIPAC has one agenda. Everybody knows what AIPAC is: American Israeli Political Action Committee. Okay, AIPAC has one agenda, and that is to support the policies of the state of Israel. They don't set policy. Whatever the policy is, they're going to follow. But they know that when they have a big convention. And who is AIPAC? AIPAC is run by non-religious Jews, not fundamental, not Orthodox Jews. It's regular American Jews. Many probably vote Democrat. But when they line up, when they have the guest speakers at AIPAC, who do they bring in? All of the Republicans. Every Republican big gun they bring in. They bring in the Vice President Cheney. They'll bring in this guy because they know this is what it's at. Now, if the ball flips. If tomorrow the ball flips and Hillary Rodham Clinton is elected to become president, Then you know who's going to be the guest speaker at AIPAC? Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright and all of the, so it's just, to me this is a matter of politics, not a matter of theology. But you got to be careful of all groups, because everybody wants a piece of your hide. Nobody, President Roosevelt, okay, take President Roosevelt. President Roosevelt, who was the God to many Jews. They came to this country. President Roosevelt in World War II was to most American Jews the man, the myth. President Roosevelt. Yet President Roosevelt, when he was begged to open up the borders to allow more German Jews to come in, what did he say?
No.
That's what. So I'm going to put my faith into President Roosevelt, how good he was with all the programs. When it came to allowing more Jews in the spirit of St. Louis, when it landed on the shores of Florida, he sent back. So you have to. Every guy has every political party and every politician has things in their closet that you have to be careful from. But I say grab as much as you can and run. That's my own personal. That's all my personal opinion.
Do you think it's part of the little guilt that Christians have when they didn't defend with the House of Islam in 1453 when Israel fought during the Crusades around that time period?
No, the Crusades were before them. Way before that. Well, do they feel a little guilty? No, I think the Christians feel a little guilty from 1939 to 1945. People forget about 1095. They know 1939 when Hitler put us in the ovens. I think that's when the Christians feel a little bit guilty about that. No one opened up their borders. Sure, I think Israel was founded on a little bit of guilt, around the world. But we've experienced a lot of guilt in Judaism, so why not share it? I'm into let them feel guilty. It's hard. It's hard to know. And then you have to bifurcate. In the fundamentalist movement, you got to bifurcate between their foreign policies and their domestic agenda, because their domestic agenda, for many Orthodox Jews, I'll be honest with you, love it. Many Orthodox Jews love their domestic agenda. For example, like against abortion. If you ask the typical Orthodox rabbi, what's he going to say about abortion? It's going to right? No, I don't know if we go that far or overturn it, but certainly, he would be stridently against abortion. And, many Orthodox Jews are stridently against stem cell research, and many Orthodox Jews are for prayers in public schools, and many Orthodox Jews line up with the Christians' rights agenda. I'm not one of them, to be honest with you. I'm Orthodox, but I'm a little afraid of their domestic agenda. How they see this country, because here we're getting off a completely different topic, but this is a topic that I think it's important today, is talking about the religion of America. What is America? That could be a different discussion for a different night, but what kind of religion does America have? Certainly the founding fathers were religious people in one sense. They were religious people in one sense. They'll always point to Jefferson, and he put in, endowed by their creator. And they'll talk about in God we trust. And the motto, they took biblical, they all talked great biblical stuff, all of the founding fathers. So in one sense they had a national religion. They did have a religion, and they certainly didn't exclude religion, from the United States. They didn't chase God out of the country. But they knew, as we should know, that you make this great big divide of where religion starts and where politics starts. You got to know where and when and how. And I think the great part of the founding fathers and how they set up this country was allowing God to come in, but at the same time allowing everybody's God to come in. This wasn't a Christian God. This was a God that allowed for everybody's beliefs. And even if you didn't want to believe in this God, even if you're an atheist and you didn't want to believe in any God, you had a part in this country. You had a place here around the table in the United States. That could never happen if they were all Jerry Falwells. If there were 55 Jerry Falwells signing the Declaration of Independence, that could never happen. Why? Because their agenda is too narrow. This is a Christian country. Jesus Christ is the boss of this country, and that's what it's all about. So that kind of makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, because we've always felt safe here, being able to, to be able to practice the way we want. When the agenda gets narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower, our collars begin to get a little more sweaty.
Look at the Orthodox Jews in Israel. They want to turn it into a theocracy over there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You know what? And it's wrong, because Israel is based upon a secular state. Israel is a secular state founded by secular people.
That's not what Orthodox
That's
do
it.
say. They
But
say it's
anytime you try to make it a narrow agenda, you're exclusionary. And we know from history, no matter where we are, the first ones to get excluded is
Jews.
there you go. So in that sense, I'm a little worried. But I think we're sophisticated enough to understand that we can take their money without buying into their entire program. I don't have to be a member of the Liberty Baptist Church down in Lynchburg or wherever, Lynchburg. Okay, they're down in Virginia. I don't have to be a member of his church to take Jerry Falwell's money. I mean, I don't have to be a Christian to take Pat Robertson's money. But I think we're well aware and with our eyes open, and if we're not, it's shame on us, not shame on them. It's because shame on us if we're fooled by them. That's amazing. Go ahead, Mohammed.
When they're individual groups, but when it's the government,
Yeah. That's when it's scary. That's, of course, that's already finished. And that's what the founding fathers were very much against. I mean, you want to be a fundamentalist living in Maryland, fine, go ahead. No, we have no problem with that. But as soon as you get the government to buy into that program, and Marvin is 100% right, that already is, once you start paying for the clergymen and telling them how to preach and what to say and where to go, then already we have a problem. And then that's the downhill slope that we have to be very careful about. That's 100% correct.
But you cannot get rid of religion from society. That's what.
No, and then there was but no one wants to get rid of religion. I think religion plays a great part in American history. I mean, every president, every inauguration, you read the 45 inauguration speeches, everyone quotes the Bible, and everyone quotes God, and everybody is, Providence, and Lincoln, who never professed any church, right? Lincoln never professed any church, yet if you read his writings, it's full of providence and God and prayer and pray for me.
He was our own little prophet.
Right? He was our own prophet. Man, that's religion at its best in America. When it's private, it's individual, and you want to go to church, go right ahead. You want to belong to a huge church, go. You want to belong to a church with 3 members, that's fine. That's no problem. The moment that government starts to dictate to us where, how, when, and how,
Well,
that's
particular religion.
yeah,
There's
that's
nothing wrong with saying some certain universal religious precept.
no. That's fine.
The trouble comes in when they say, they start out with all religions are good and everything's fine. It's just when it gets narrower and narrower and they
Right.
say, well, some of them are.
Some of them,
and you're just,
or
"This one ain't," and you-
or you know what, or they try to, you see, they're very sophisticated. See, they learned, Jerry Falwell, I pick him as an example. In 1975, or even earlier, in 1964. In 1964, when was the march? No, it was way before 64. The Montgomery March, when Martin Luther King marched on Selma. It must have been like 61 or 60. It was 60, probably it was 60, right? In 60 or 61 when the famous march on Selma, 60, okay? 1960. So, it was a big to-do in America, this whole thing. So they asked Jerry Falwell, what do you say? And especially once the civil rights movement started to roll, right, and it started to pick up steam, and in '64, when Johnson passed through the Civil Rights Act and all of these things, all of that stuff, Bull Connor down in Montgomery. So they asked Jerry Falwell, well, what do you think? Well, I think that pastors in America ought to stay in leading their flock. This is a quote from Jerry Falwell in the '60s. Religious pastors ought to stay focused on leading their spiritual flock. It's not his business. Martin Luther King, who cares? It's not my business. I'm a spiritual guy. What do I got to get involved in politics? Jimmy Carter is now elected. Okay? In 1979, Jerry Falwell, 15 years after passing the Civil Rights Act, now they ask him, Mr. Falwell, how do you feel today about what's going on in America? Well, it's time for the moral majority to raise its voice, right? And who pushed Reagan in? Who was one of the biggest backers of Ronald Reagan? The moral majority, right? Jerry Falwell. So all of a sudden, then it was okay, So things have a way of changing, depending upon the issue. If it's civil rights for blacks, no, we have to stay within the church. But if it's abortion or prayers in school, then then we're out there and and canvassing and Ralph Reed and the Christian Coalition. So you just gotta be sophisticated enough, and Jews are wise enough to know when to see a wolf in or in sheep's clothing. You got to be able to be careful with that. But overall, I think it's still the greatest place in the world to live. I mean, I wouldn't live anywhere else.
Except for Canada.
Well, Canada. That's of course the Garden of Eden. Yeah. Anything else? Go ahead.
I think that maybe I won't see it, but I think you will see a lot of Jews that will go to China.
Move to China? Oh, I agree. I think, I don't know if a lot of Jews will move there, but Jews are there already. I mean, you have already a bunch of Israelis there. Guys go to China all the time. There's only one problem in China, and that is that China does not recognize Judaism as a sanctioned religion. So the guy Chabad, like Rabbi Cantor and Rabbi Freilich, I think are there, one in Shanghai and one in Beijing. I think they're limited to servicing only foreigners and guests. They cannot go out there. There's no mitzvah tank. They don't go like on a Lag Bomer. They make a big bonfire downtown Beijing and invite, hey, come for free egg rolls and some egg young foo or whatever over there. No, it's forbidden. China is still a communist. If the Communist Party would ever break apart, which will eventually do that, and it will become freedom like normal relation, a country, then I think more Jews would move there. China, as a matter of fact, as far as we know, I mean, from what we see, has never had really a problem. I mean, in World War II in Shanghai was a haven for many Jews. Thousands of Jews went to New Haven, both Hasidic Jews and Lithuanian Jews. They, spent many, many years in Shanghai. So Jews never had a problem with China, and I could see it happening. I mean, you know what? The American empire is not going to last forever. I mean, it's not going to last. No empire lasts forever. We've been on top of the ball for many a year now.
It's not going to fall.
No, it's not going to fall. It just won't be the power. It just won't be the power.
Be like England.
Yeah.
England. Well.
What? England is okay, but it's not England. It's not England of 100 years ago. It's not England where the sun never sets on the British Empire. Right? Or as Winston Churchill's, I was not elected prime minister to see this dissolution of Her Majesty's empire.
No,
Guess what? Guess what? Guess what? Yeah. Go ahead, Shoshana.
Well, I understand there might be a lot of, limitations of living in China as Jews because of the restriction, I don't know what the citizenship involves, and the limitation on how many children you can have.
Right.
Keep you from at least keeping the children free and citizens and full.
Well, yeah, that's probably true. I mean, that's absolutely. China has a rule. I think you have 2 kids or 1 kid or something like that. 1 kid, sure. And if you're a Chabadnik, 1 kid is like every year. So that doesn't help being a Chinese citizen. All of that. So you have. I mean, as right now, the political situation is still a little tough. Because you never know. Tiananmen Square taught us that, as much as they're going to be liberal, one moment it could turn like this. I'm even afraid of Russia, to be honest with you.
Really?
I mean, yeah, I'm still afraid of Russia because, with all of the liberalization that's going on over there. But you know what? In 1 second it can turn. Literally in 1 second. Putin goes down or Putin decides to turn. Well, how hard is it to call in the army? I mean, it's nothing. I mean, generals need a fight, right? Generals love a war. They don't like to sit and twiddle their thumbs. And Russia has never had this history of democracy. It's always been run by strong dictators and czars, and Stalin type of people. So it doesn't have a history of liberalization and of democracy.
So it seems to be getting some.
We have no clue how lucky we are. We have absolutely no clue, because what this country has proven over and over again is no matter how much there is extremes going on, the middle holds. The middle holds. It's never, I mean, during World War II, we had people who were anti-interventionist. Tremendous support for isolationism. I mean, the great hero Lindbergh was an isolationist. It was all the Jews, Henry Ford, Father Coughlin. I mean, tremendous. But you know what? The middle held. It held out there. It didn't tip here. It didn't tip there. And and we've been very, very, very lucky that that's been the case. That's been the case of what's going on. Even in the 60s, you see, the 60s made a switch. The left was, but you know what? It didn't tip over. Not everybody became a hippie. We didn't dissolve the army after Vietnam. Nixon resigned, and guess what? The next day there was Ford, and Ford was sitting as a president. No gunshots, no bullets, nothing went on. Then Jimmy Carter became prime president. He left. Yeah, we have a country that pretty much live and let live. You know what? Just like Washington wrote to the Jewish community, to the people in Newport, Rhode Island, a very famous letter. And we should hang it up here. We should publicize that. He wrote after the war, I thank you very much for your prayers, because they wrote them, we're behind you, everything else. This is a country that will give no sanction to bigotry, and it'll give no help to whatever it was. It says, this is a country that only asks you one thing, to be a good citizen. That's it. Follow your conscience in whatever religion you feel. Just be a good citizen. Is that hard to do?
No.
That's it.
That's why I argue that
no, you see, he didn't mean against dissent. To be a good citizen does not mean to be quiet and to shut up. You have to have your voice heard. This is the only way a country could survive. I mean, if we were 100%, if 100% of the country was behind Bush, I'd say the middle would never hold under that circumstance. You'd need a counterbalance. I mean, the genius of the federal government is unbelievable. You know what? Now we're afraid. You put in, look who Bush put in. He's going to stack the court with all these Mishagayim. They're not Mishagayim. As a matter of fact, I'm no student of the Supreme Court, but I'd like to do a study that I bet you that as soon as a guy sits on that bench, he moves to the middle. And even the guys like...
Yes.
Yes? Is this true? Because the middle...
Not like Scalia.
Even Scalia. Scalia's a radical. Is Scalia ready to do away with the Bill of Rights?
No.
Clarence Thomas.
There is a good book on that is entitled The Center Holds. I should bring it to you.
Right. And that's basically what happens. Whether we turn over Ray v.
When it became